When 900 Hell's Angels surrounded a little old black woman's house, the town called the National Guard. They were wrong to call. Dead wrong. But let me back up 24 hours. To the night when death itself came knocking on Eleanor Vance's door. The thermometer read 22 below zero. The wind screamed at 70 miles per hour. The snow fell so hard it looked like static on an old TV. Not weather. A weapon. The kind of cold that doesn't just kill you. It erases you from existence until spring thaw finds what's left. Every light in 3 counties had gone dark, except one. In a century-old farmhouse, a single flame flickered in the window. Inside, 82-year-old Eleanor Vance sat alone by her fireplace, the last barrier between life and frozen death for 20 miles in any direction. She had no idea she was about to make a choice that would change 1,000 lives forever. Most people looked at Eleanor and saw just another elderly widow. They didn't see the hands that had spanked racist bullies and comforted crying children during her 40 years teaching elementary school. They missed the eyes that had witnessed crosses burning on lawns and Martin Luther King's dream taking flight. They overlooked the spine that hadn't bent an inch while raising 3 children alone after her husband's body came home from Vietnam in a flag-draped box. Her grandfather built this house with bloody hands after escaping north during the Great Migration, each brick a promise that his family would someday know freedom. Now Eleanor lived here alone, the nearest neighbor a quarter mile away. Not from fear, Eleanor feared nothing mortal, but because after 8 decades of other people's noise, she'd earned her silence. The locals joked that Eleanor could run the country better than the president with one hand tied behind her back. That woman's got more sense in her pinky finger than most folks got in their whole body, they'd say. What they didn't say, but everyone knew. Eleanor Vance could spot a lie from a mile away, and she'd call you on it to your face, whether you were the town drunk or the mayor himself. The vibration came first, not the house settling, not the storm. Something mechanical, something human, a deep rumble that made Eleanor's teacup tremble against its saucer. The sound grew louder, engines fighting a losing battle against nature's rage, then abruptly died into silence. Nobody should be out tonight. Nobody could survive more than minutes in this killing cold. 5 minutes passed in eerie silence. Then it came. Boom! 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 Not a neighbor's nervous knock. Not the polite tap of a lost traveler. Something else entirely. The deliberate pounding of fists that had broken bones before. Eleanor set down her knitting with steady hands. In the corner stood her late husband's shotgun, loaded since the day he left for Vietnam. Beside the fireplace hung an iron poker her father had given her with 6 words that defined her life. Be kind, but never be foolish. She didn't reach for either. Have you ever felt that split second when fear and courage collide? When every instinct screams, run, but something deeper whispers, stand? What would you do if you were all alone in the dead of night during a killer blizzard and heard 20 Hell's Angels bikers pounding on your door? Most people would hide, call 911, pray. Eleanor Vance did something else entirely. This 82-year-old black widow teacher, barely 5 feet tall, faced the most feared motorcycle gang in America with nothing but her nightgown, her principles, and a lifetime of hard-earned wisdom. What happened in the next 24 hours didn't just save lives. It shattered every stereotype about who we should fear and who we should trust. By tomorrow morning, her small town would think they were witnessing the beginning of a massacre. They were witnessing something else entirely, something so powerful it would make the evening news in 27 states and change how an entire community understood the word judgment. If you've ever been judged by your appearance, or if you've ever judged someone else, hit that like button right now. This true story will shake you to your core. Subscribe now Because what happened when 900 leather-clad bikers surrounded this elderly woman's house the next morning isn't just unexpected. It's almost impossible to believe. But I have the newspaper clippings to prove every word. The local sheriff called it the most surprising thing I've seen in 30 years of law enforcement. Eleanor called it something else. Just what happens when you stop seeing patches and start seeing people. Stay with me, because this American story isn't just about bikers and a brave old lady. It's about you and the walls we build between ourselves and others that one act of courage can tear down forever. Eleanor Vance spent 40 years teaching at Cedar Creek Elementary School. For 4 decades, she stood in the same classroom, room 109, watching children grow from gap-toothed first graders to high school graduates who brought their own children back to meet Mrs. Vance. 3 generations of Cedar Creek families learned to read under her watchful eye. She wasn't just strict, she was legendary. Parents who once trembled at her disapproving glance would beg her to take their children. That woman taught me the difference between right and wrong better than my own daddy, people would say. When her husband James didn't come home from Vietnam in 1968, Eleanor was left with 3 children under the age of 10 and a mountain of grief. The town expected her to crumble. They were wrong. Eleanor simply squared her shoulders and did what needed doing. She taught days, sewed clothing at night, and somehow managed to put all 3 children through college on a teacher's salary. Her oldest became a doctor, her middle child an engineer, and her youngest a teacher like herself. They all lived in different states now, calling weekly but visiting rarely. These days, Eleanor lived carefully on her teacher's pension and Social Security. It wasn't much, just $1,854 a month. After property taxes, medications, and utilities, there wasn't much left. She grew vegetables in summer, canned everything she could, and kept the thermostat at 65 degrees to save on heating costs. But she never complained. "I have everything I need," she'd tell concerned neighbors, "and some of what I want." That's more than most people in this world. The farmhouse stood as the last piece of her family's history in Cedar Creek. Her grandfather Walter had built it with his own hands in 1919 after fleeing Mississippi with nothing but the clothes on his back and a dream of freedom. The house wasn't just wood and nails. It was proof that one man's courage could create a legacy. Every creaking floorboard told a story. Every chipped door frame held memories. But at 102 years old, the house was showing its age worse than Eleanor. The roof leaked in 3 places. The ancient furnace consumed propane like a thirsty giant. The porch sagged dangerously on one side. Local handymen offered discounts out of respect, but even discounted repairs were beyond her budget. Eleanor had become expert at temporary fixes, patching the roof with tar, stuffing rags around windows to block drafts, ignoring the growing water stain on the living room ceiling. "I'll outlast this old house," she'd joke, though sometimes at night she worried which would give out first, her body or her home. 3 days a week, Eleanor drove her 1998 Buick to the Cedar Creek Community Center. The building, once the town's elementary school, now served as a lifeline for local children. Eleanor ran the after-school reading program, where 20 children, mostly from families who couldn't afford childcare, came to read, do homework, and find stability. Miss Eleanor, as the children called her, moved slower these days, but her mind remained razor-sharp. She knew which children needed extra help with math and which ones needed extra attention because things weren't good at home. She knew which parents were struggling with addiction and which were working 3 jobs to make ends meet. The center itself was barely hanging on. The roof needed replacing. The ancient plumbing regularly backed up. The heating bill alone ate half the monthly budget. Last month, the board had voted to cut the summer program entirely. The after-school program, Eleanor's program, was next on the chopping block. "If we lose the center," Eleanor told the town council last spring. We lose these children. Not all at once, but one by one, to the streets, to hopelessness, to the belief that nobody cares. I won't let that happen. But her passion couldn't pay the bills. Without major funding, the center would close by Christmas. Eleanor's understanding of hospitality ran bone deep. Her grandmother, Ida, had run a safe house during the days of the Green Book, when black travelers needed special guides to know where they could safely eat, sleep, or even stop for gas. The modest home in Kentucky had a spare room that was never empty, a pot of beans that was never finished, and a door that was never locked to travelers in need. Your grandmother saved lives with that spare room, Eleanor's mother would tell her. People were murdered for being in the wrong place after sundown, but Ida's door was always open. Ida had a saying that Eleanor carried through life. An open door is a prayer you send out into the world. When Eleanor questioned the wisdom of letting strangers in, Ida explained, "The good Lord didn't put us here to be safe, child. He put us here to be useful." That legacy shaped Eleanor more than anything else. When the school district wanted to expel children for behavior problems, Eleanor fought for second chances. When neighbors fell ill, her casseroles appeared without being asked. When the town faced flooding in '97, her living room became an emergency shelter. Helping wasn't something Eleanor did. It was who she was. At 82, Eleanor's body betrayed her daily in small, humiliating ways. Her fingers, once nimble enough to teach piano, now struggled with buttons and jar lids. Her knees, strong through decades of classroom standing, now protested each trip up the farmhouse stairs. Her hearing had faded enough that she sometimes missed what the children said at the center, though pride kept her from admitting it. Winter brought special challenges. The quarter-mile driveway became impassable in heavy snow, sometimes trapping her for days. Power outages were common, leaving her with just the fireplace for heat. The nearest neighbor, Tom Jenkins, was himself 76 and not much help in emergencies. The isolation, bearable in summer when birds sang and garden needed tending, grew heavy in winter's silence. On the worst days, Eleanor would go hours without speaking aloud to anyone but her late husband's photograph. Eleanor was halfway through her evening prayers when the pounding started. 3 heavy blows that made the hinges rattle. Not a knock, a demand. She set her Bible on the side table and rose slowly, her joints protesting. Living alone for 20 years had taught her caution. The poker beside the fireplace felt solid in her hand. 14 inches of cast iron her father had given her when she first moved to this isolated spot. Just in case, he'd said. In 20 years, she'd never needed it for anything but stoking flames. Tonight might be different. Eleanor moved toward the door with the quiet dignity that had made first graders straighten in their seats for 4 decades. No rushing, no panic, just measured steps and clear thinking. The peephole her son had installed last Christmas was useless, frosted over completely. The window beside the door showed only dark shapes against swirling snow. Big shapes, multiple shapes. "Who's there?" she called, her teacher's voice cutting through oak and storm alike. The answer came in a voice like gravel wrapped in velvet, deep, rough, but carefully controlled. "Ma'am, my name is Frank. We're stranded out here, 20 of us. Our bikes can't make it through this snow, and the temperature's dropping fast. We saw your light from the highway." Eleanor's grip tightened on the poker. 20 men, 20 strangers, in a blizzard, in the middle of nowhere, at her isolated farmhouse. "We just need shelter until morning, ma'am," the voice continued. "A barn, a porch, anything. We won't be any trouble. Some of my guys are already showing signs of frostbite. 20 men could overpower one elderly woman without breaking a sweat. 20 men could take everything she owned. 20 men could do unspeakable things and leave no witnesses. But 20 men could also freeze to death in a Cedar Creek blizzard while she sat warm by her fire. Eleanor closed her eyes. Her grandmother Ida's voice seemed to float from the past. Child, the most dangerous thing in this world isn't opening your door to strangers. It's closing your heart to those in need. She thought of all those travelers her grandmother had sheltered when no one else would. How many lives saved by a simple open door. She thought of her own children, now scattered across the country. Would a stranger help them if they were stranded in a deadly storm? Eleanor slid the bolt back and opened the door just enough to peer through the crack, poker still firmly in hand. The man standing closest to the door was a mountain, 6'4" at least, with shoulders wide as her doorframe. His leather vest was crusted with snow and ice, the patches partially obscured but unmistakable. The winged death's head that had made headlines and sparked fear for decades. Hell's Angels. Behind him stood other men, their breath forming clouds in the porch light, their faces raw from wind and cold, their massive frames shivering despite their tough exteriors. Frank, the apparent leader, had a face weathered by years on the road. His beard, thick and mostly gray, was frozen in places, tiny icicles hanging where sweat or breath had crystallized. His eyes, though, weren't what Eleanor expected. They weren't threatening or demanding. They were tired, worried, and startlingly respectful. The patches on their vests told a story the nightly news had burned into American consciousness. Outlaw motorcycle gang, dangerous, unpredictable. But their faces told a different story. These weren't predators looking for prey. They were men at the end of their endurance, caught in nature's violence with nowhere to turn. One man toward the back was supporting another, whose lips had turned an alarming shade of blue. Another was rubbing his hands frantically, his fingers waxy white with early frostbite. A younger one, barely more than a boy really, couldn't control his violent shivering. The contrast was jarring. These intimidating men, with their tattoos and leather and fearsome reputation, reduced to vulnerability by something as simple as winter cold. As if sensing her thoughts, Frank spoke again, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Ma'am, I give you my word as president of this chapter. We mean no harm. We were doing a charity toy run for the Children's Hospital in Millfield when the storm hit faster than forecasted. Highway's impassable now. We just need to get out of this cold." Eleanor looked past him to the others. 20 men who could not possibly fit in her modest home. 20 strangers with a reputation that made seasoned police officers nervous. 20 human beings who would die without shelter in these temperatures. Her decision was made before she consciously realized it. She pulled the door wide open, standing barely 5 feet tall against Frank's towering frame, poker still in hand. "Well, don't just stand there letting all my heat out," she said in the same tone she'd used on generations of school children. "Get in here before you catch your death, every last one of you." She pointed the poker at them for emphasis. "But wipe those boots thoroughly. This floor is 100 years old and doesn't need your snow and road salt grinding into it." The transformation on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. Surprise, relief, and something like childlike gratitude washing over features more accustomed to scowling. "Yes, ma'am," Frank said, turning to his men. "You heard the lady?" Boots wiped clean, helmets and gloves by the door. "Mind your manners like your mamas taught you." One by one, they filed in, ducking their heads under the doorframe, carefully stomping snow from their boots onto the mat. Each nodded respectfully to Eleanor as they passed, some murmuring, "Thank you, ma'am," in voices thick with gratitude and cold. They moved with surprising care, these large men in her small space, as if afraid their very size might break something. The last man through the door turned to her and removed his glove to offer a bare hand. "I'm tiny, ma'am. Thank you for saving our lives tonight." Eleanor looked up at the 6'6" man with massive tattooed forearms and couldn't help but smile at the nickname. She took his offered hand. Eleanor Vance. Now close that door before we all freeze, and let's see about getting you boys warmed up. 20 Hells Angels bikers in Eleanor Vance's modest farmhouse created a surreal scene. These men, whose very appearance made people cross streets, moved through her home like careful giants in a china shop. They hunched their shoulders to appear smaller. They spoke in hushed tones. They said please and thank you with surprising frequency. "You can put your things over there," Eleanor directed, pointing to a corner of the living room with her poker, which she still hadn't set down. Old habits of caution died hard. The men arranged their wet jackets and vests with military precision. No one sat without being invited. No one touched anything without permission. When one younger biker absent-mindedly put his elbow on her doily-covered side table, an older member cleared his throat, and the young man immediately straightened up with a mumbled apology. "Ma'am, we truly appreciate this," Frank said, standing awkwardly in her living room, his massive frame making the space seem suddenly tiny. "Most folks see our patches and close their blinds. You opened your door." Eleanor finally set the poker down. "Well, I haven't been murdered yet, so I suppose that's a good sign." The unexpected joke broke the tension, and several bikers smiled for the first time since entering. "You've got a long night ahead with 20 extra bodies to feed," Frank continued. "We've got emergency rations on our bikes if we can dig them out." "Nonsense," Eleanor replied. "I've got plenty of food. Though I admit I wasn't expecting a small army for dinner." "You mentioned a toy run earlier," Eleanor said, as she led them toward her kitchen. "What exactly is that?" Frank's weathered face softened. "It's our annual Christmas drive for the Children's Hospital in Millfield. Been doing it 23 years now. We collect toys, donations, whatever the kids need. This year, we raised almost $30,000 for their new cancer treatment wing." Another biker, younger with tattoos covering his neck, added, "My daughter was treated there when she was 4, leukemia. Those doctors saved her life, but it was the toys and games that kept her fighting." Eleanor stopped in her tracks, reassessing these men in leather. "We do fundraisers year-round," Frank continued, seemingly eager to explain themselves. "Bike washes, poker runs, charity rides. Last year, we put 3 kids through college with our scholarship fund." "The news never mentions that part," Eleanor said quietly. "No, ma'am," Frank agreed. "They just show the 1% who give the rest of us a bad name. Most of us are just working men who love motorcycles and believe in giving back." Eleanor's small kitchen couldn't possibly fit 20 large men, so they rotated in groups. A burly man with a ZZ-top beard stepped forward. "Ma'am, I was a short-order cook for 15 years before I started my own garage. Let me help." His name was Diesel, and he moved through Eleanor's kitchen with surprising grace. While she directed, he chopped, stirred, and seasoned. Other bikers joined in, one peeling potatoes with the speed of someone who'd done it in the military, another opening cans and organizing ingredients. Eleanor's modest pantry yielded unexpected bounty. Jars of home-canned vegetables from her garden, dried beans and rice, cornmeal for bread, 4 cans of Spam she'd been saving for emergencies. "This is definitely an emergency," she said, handing them to Diesel, who nodded appreciatively. "My specialty is Spam fried rice," he said. "Used to make it for my kids when money was tight." The kitchen filled with delicious smells as Diesel worked miracles with her simple ingredients. Spam fried with onions and her canned green beans, cornbread baked in cast iron, a massive pot of rice stretched with whatever vegetables they could find. Eleanor watched these tattooed men working together in her kitchen, passing ingredients, washing dishes as they went, treating her worn utensils with careful respect. Not once did they curse in her presence or make her feel unsafe. It was a different side of humanity than the nightly news had led her to expect from men with their reputation. With 20 extra mouths, they ate in shifts around her small dining table. The food wasn't fancy, but in the middle of a blizzard, it tasted like a feast. Eleanor couldn't remember the last time her home had been filled with so much life. As the night deepened and the storm howled outside, they gathered around her fireplace, the only heat source with the electricity still out. The fire cast dancing shadows across faces that gradually relaxed as the warmth seeped into cold bones. Frank, or Preacher, as the others called him, sat closest to Eleanor. In the firelight, she noticed the Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. "Vietnam?" she asked quietly. He nodded. 2 tours, 68 and 69. Came home to people spitting on my uniform. His voice held old pain, but no bitterness. Found brotherhood with these men when the country didn't want us back. Eleanor touched her wedding photo on the mantel. My James never came home from Vietnam. 1968. The room fell silent until Preacher said softly, "Honor to his service, ma'am." Tiny, the giant who'd been last through her door, pulled out his phone and showed Eleanor photos of 3 small children before the battery died. "My grandkids," he said proudly. "Oldest is starting kindergarten this year, smart as a whip." "I taught kindergarten for 40 years, Eleanor replied, and soon found herself sharing stories of generations of Cedar Creek children who'd passed through her classroom. The conversation turned to her volunteer work at the community center. "Place is falling apart," she admitted. "Roof leaks, heating systems ancient, and the funding's nearly gone. Those children have nowhere else to go after school. Some don't have proper homes to go back to at all." Several bikers exchanged glances at this, but the conversation moved on. As the night progressed, the walls between them, built by media stereotypes and societal expectations, crumbled in the face of simple human connection. Have you ever had a moment when someone you feared turned out to be nothing like what you expected? When prejudice melted away in the face of real human connection? I want you to hit that like button right now if you've ever been judged unfairly, or if you've judged someone else and later realized how wrong you were. Leave a comment sharing your own story of unexpected friendship or a time when appearances proved deceiving. What did you learn? How did it change you? Your experiences might help someone else see beyond stereotypes in their own life. And don't forget to subscribe, because this incredible story is only halfway through. What happens next shocked an entire town and made national headlines. As midnight approached, Eleanor offered her bedroom and spare room to the bikers. "No, ma'am," Preacher insisted firmly. "You keep your rooms. We're grateful enough for your floor and this fire." The men arranged themselves throughout her living room and kitchen, using their leather jackets as pillows and sharing the spare blankets Eleanor provided. They sorted themselves out with the efficiency of men used to making do in difficult circumstances, the older ones closest to the fire, the younger ones further away, ones taking the cooler spots by the walls. Eleanor sat in her rocking chair for a moment, watching these feared outlaws settling down in her home like a litter of overgrown puppies. Her house, usually so silent at night, now filled with the quiet breathing of 20 souls saved from the storm. For the first time in years, the old farmhouse felt like a home again, rather than a museum of memories. Eleanor woke to a world transformed. The killing darkness had given way to a brilliance that hurt the eyes. Sunlight bounced off fresh snow like millions of tiny diamonds. The storm that had threatened death now offered beauty in apology. She lay in bed, listening for the sounds of her unexpected guests, but heard only silence. Had they left already? A flash of disappointment surprised her. Eleanor wrapped her robe tightly around herself and made her way downstairs. The living room floor where 20 men had slept was now spotless. Blankets folded neatly, furniture returned to its proper place. If not for the lingering scent of leather and motor oil, she might have imagined the whole night. A movement outside caught her eye. Through the window, she saw them. 20 black-clad figures moving through the snow, not leaving, but working. With shovels likely found in her shed, they cleared paths from her door to the road. Others were digging out their motorcycles from snowdrifts. Some were examining her roof, pointing at places where the weight of snow threatened the aging shingles. She watched in amazement as one massive biker carefully knocked icicles from her gutters while another reinforced her porch steps with scrap wood. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of men used to working together, calling out warnings and sharing tools without wasted words. When Eleanor opened the door, Frank looked up from where he was salting her walkway. "Morning, ma'am. Hope we didn't wake you." "You didn't have to do all this," she said, gesturing at the cleared paths and the neatly stacked firewood that had somehow multiplied overnight. "Least we could do," he replied. "Coffee's hot in the kitchen. Diesel made breakfast, too." Sure enough, her kitchen counters held plates of scrambled eggs and her precious coffee brewed to perfection. The kitchen was cleaner than before they arrived. After they'd all eaten and prepared to leave, the bikers gathered on her porch. Frank stood before her, helmet in hand, the others forming a semicircle behind him. His face, hard and weathered, softened with something like reverence. "Mrs. Vance," he said, using her formal name for the first time. "There aren't proper words for what you did last night." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Anyone would have—" "No, ma'am," he interrupted gently. "That's just it. Anyone wouldn't have. Most people would have seen our cuts and called 911. They'd have bolted their doors and hidden until we left or froze." Several men nodded behind him, their expressions solemn. "You didn't just give us shelter," Frank continued. "You gave us dignity. You saw past these patches and leather." "I saw human beings, Frank," she corrected him. "That's all. Human beings in trouble." He nodded slowly, something unspoken passing between them, an understanding that transcended age, race, and lifestyle. "We have a code, Mrs. Vance. We don't forget our debts. Not ever." "There's no debt," she insisted. "Just be safe on those bikes." "We won't forget this," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. "You have my word." One by one, they shook her hand or nodded respectfully as they descended her porch steps. They mounted their bikes, now arranged in formation on her plowed driveway. Starting motorcycles in below-freezing temperatures took effort, but soon the morning air filled with the synchronized rumble of 20 engines. Frank, at the head of the formation, raised his hand in a final salute. Eleanor raised hers in return. Then, in perfect staggered formation, they rolled down her driveway and onto the highway, a black snake against the pristine white landscape. Eleanor stood watching until the last bike disappeared around the bend and the thunder of engines faded to silence. The abrupt transition from chaotic fullness to complete solitude left her momentarily disoriented. She turned back to her empty house, now echoing with absence. By afternoon, word had spread through Cedar Creek. Eleanor's neighbor Tom Jenkins had seen the bikers leaving and called the sheriff, who stopped by just to check that she was all right. "Hell's Angels, Eleanor? In your house?" Mrs. Peterson from church exclaimed when she called. "You could have been murdered in your bed." Even Pastor Williams expressed concern during his wellness check. "They were just men caught in a storm," Eleanor told each worried caller. "Nothing more frightening than that." "But their reputation," the pastor began, "is made by people who've never sat at a table with them," Eleanor finished firmly. "Judge not, Pastor. Isn't that what you preach on Sundays?" The calls eventually stopped, and Cedar Creek found other things to gossip about. Eleanor returned to her quiet routines, though sometimes she found herself pausing at sudden engine sounds on the highway. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, reading yesterday's newspaper. The power had returned sometime in the night when she heard it. that same distinctive rumble that had announced the bikers' arrival during the blizzard. But different, louder. At first, she thought she was imagining things, her mind playing tricks after the excitement of the previous day. But the sound grew steadily, from distant thunder to an approaching roar that made her windows vibrate in their frames. Eleanor set down her teacup and moved to the front window. What she saw made her breath catch. Coming down the cleared highway was a river of chrome and leather. Not 20 motorcycles this time, but hundreds upon hundreds. They filled the road completely, riding two abreast in perfect formation, stretching back farther than she could see. The sound was no longer just a rumble. It was a physical force that shook the ground beneath her home. As they drew closer, Eleanor could make out different patches and colors. Not just Hell's Angels, but other clubs as well. Bandidos, pagans, local clubs she didn't recognize, each with their own insignia, flying their colors proudly. They moved with the precision of a military parade, maintaining perfect distances between bikes, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun against the snow-covered landscape. The procession turned onto her small country road, the lead riders slowing to allow the others to make the turn. They kept coming and coming, an endless stream of motorcycles pouring onto the narrow road that had never seen more traffic than the occasional tractor or pickup truck. They filled the road completely before starting to line up along the shoulder, then spreading out into the fields on either side. The organization was flawless, no confusion, no chaos, just hundreds of powerful machines, and their riders arranging themselves in concentric semicircles around her property. In town, Cedar Creek had ground to a complete halt. The Saturday morning farmers' market emptied in minutes as people rushed to lock themselves inside homes and businesses. The sheriff's phone rang off the hook with panicked calls. There must be 1,000 of them. They've surrounded the Vance place. It's a gang war. Call the state police. Deputies raced toward Eleanor's property, only to find themselves unable to get past the wall of motorcycles that now blocked every approach. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, some praying, some calling relatives to say goodbye, convinced a massacre was about to begin. Mrs. Peterson from church actually fainted when she counted the first 100 bikes passing her house. Tom Jenkins, Eleanor's nearest neighbor, grabbed his shotgun and headed for his storm cellar, certain that civilization had finally collapsed. In the midst of the growing panic, Eleanor Vance calmly wrapped her faded blue shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto her front porch. She stood there, all 5 feet and 95 pounds of her, as the last motorcycles found their places and the engines finally fell silent. The sudden quiet was almost as overwhelming as the noise had been. 900 men and women in leather stood or sat on their bikes, all facing her small farmhouse. Eleanor counted at least 7 different club patches, some traditional rivals, all gathered together in a show of unified purpose. At the front of the formation, a familiar figure dismounted and walked toward her. Frank removed his sunglasses as he approached, his face solemn but his eyes warm with respect. The sea of bikers parted for him like water, creating a path straight to her porch steps. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at her. "Morning, Mrs. Vance Frank," she replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "This is quite a gathering." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "I told you we wouldn't forget. Can you imagine the courage it takes to face 900 bikers surrounding your home?" That moment when Eleanor Vance stood alone on her porch, dignity intact, not knowing why they had returned. That's the kind of courage we could all use more of in this world. The courage to face the unknown without letting fear control us. If you're moved by Eleanor's bravery and this incredible true story, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to see more remarkable American stories of courage, kindness, and unexpected heroes. Because this moment, this standoff between one elderly teacher and an army of bikers, is about to transform into something nobody in Cedar Creek could have imagined. I promise, what happens next will restore your faith in humanity in ways that might bring tears to your eyes. It certainly did for everyone who witnessed it. We told our brothers what you did, Frank continued, gesturing to the massive gathering. Not just our chapter, but others across 3 states. How you opened your door when most would have called the cops. How you treated us like human beings worthy of respect and kindness. He looked back at the assembled riders, then back to Eleanor. In our world, ma'am, a debt like that, it doesn't go unpaid. When one of us owes, we all owe. It's our code. Eleanor gripped the porch railing, suddenly understanding the magnitude of what was happening. These weren't men coming for revenge or trouble. This was something else entirely. "What have you done, Frank?" she asked softly. Frank smiled. A real smile this time, transforming his weathered face. "We've brought a proper thank you, Mrs. Vance. The kind you deserve." Frank raised his hand in a signal, and the rumble of engines started again. Not from motorcycles, but from behind the massive gathering. The crowd of bikers parted once more as 2 large moving trucks slowly made their way up Eleanor's driveway, their diesel engines groaning with effort. The trucks, massive commercial rigs with unmarked trailers, stopped beside her house. In the sudden silence that followed, Eleanor could hear whispers from neighbors who had cautiously emerged from their homes, watching from a safe distance. "What is this?" Eleanor asked, her hand still gripping the porch railing. Frank climbed the first 2 steps, still keeping a respectful distance. "After we left yesterday, I made some calls. Then those brothers made more calls. Word spread about the lady who saved 20 Hells Angels during the worst blizzard in 30 years. He gestured to the assembled crowd. "But we wanted to do more than just say thanks. So we did some asking around town. Discreetly, you understand." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. The thought of Hell's Angels discreetly investigating her in tiny Cedar Creek almost made her laugh despite her shock. "We learned about your teaching career," Frank continued. 40 years shaping young minds. "We learned about your husband's sacrifice in Vietnam. He touched the Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. And we learned about the community center." Eleanor's breath caught. "How did they know about that?" "Heard it's struggling," Frank said. "Heard the roof's shot, the heating's about to die, and they're cutting programs for kids who have nowhere else to go." He turned toward the trucks. "The thing is, Mrs. Vance, a lot of us were those kids once. The ones who needed somewhere to go. If someone like you had been there for us back then, well, maybe fewer of us would have taken wrong turns before finding our way." At his signal, the back doors of both trucks rolled up with a metallic clatter. "We made more calls," Frank said, "to every club and chapter within 300 miles. Told them Eleanor Vance's story. Asked for contributions. Bikers began unloading the trucks with military precision. From the first came computers, not old donated models, but brand new systems still in boxes. From the second came sporting equipment, basketballs, footballs, soccer nets, baseball bats, and gloves. Art supplies followed, easels, paints, clay, and craft materials in quantities Eleanor had never seen. Most stunning of all were the bicycles, hundreds of them, in every size and color, being arranged in neat rows on her snow-covered front lawn. Red ones, blue ones, pink ones with streamers, sturdy mountain bikes for teenagers, tiny training wheel models for the youngest children, a rainbow of possibility against the white snow. "Every kid should have a bike," Frank explained, seeing her amazement. "First taste of freedom. First chance to feel the wind and go somewhere under your own power." Eleanor's hand covered her mouth as she watched the procession of gifts continue. Winter coats, boots, backpacks, books. It seemed endless. Another biker approached Frank and handed him a thick envelope. The man nodded respectfully to Eleanor before returning to the group. "This is from all of us," Frank said, extending the envelope toward her. "It's for the center, for a new roof, for heating, for whatever else those kids need." Eleanor's hands trembled as she took it. Inside was cash, more cash than she had ever seen in one place. Bound stacks of hundreds and fifties. She couldn't begin to count it. $56,842, Frank said quietly. Gathered in less than 24 hours from bikers across 3 states. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "That's not all," he continued. "We've got members who are plumbers, electricians, carpenters, roofers. They'll be at the center Monday morning to start repairs. All materials, all labor, free of charge." He gestured to a group of men standing by one of the trucks. "Those brothers there? They run a heating company in Millfield. They're donating a new system for the center. Top of the line, installed next week." Eleanor's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. The community center had been dying a slow death for years. The town council had rejected funding requests. Grant applications had been denied. The children who depended on it were about to lose their safe haven. And now, in one impossible morning, every problem had been solved by men society had taught her to fear. "I can't," she began, her voice failing her. "You can," Frank said simply. "You will. Because those kids need you, and now you've got what you need to help them." A tear traced its way down Eleanor's weathered cheek. "Why?" she whispered. "Why all this for one night's shelter?" Frank's expression softened. "Because you saw human beings, ma'am. Not monsters, not stereotypes, just men who needed help. That kind of seeing, it's rare in this world." From the edge of her property, Eleanor could see her neighbors slowly emerging from their homes, their expressions transformed from fear to astonishment as they watched the bikers unloading gifts rather than weapons. Tom Jenkins, who'd been hiding in his storm cellar with a shotgun, stood open-mouthed at his property line. Mrs. Peterson, who had called the sheriff in panic, was now taking pictures with her phone. Even Pastor Williams had arrived, his usual judgment replaced by speechless wonder. The town of Cedar Creek was witnessing something none of them had thought possible, that the men they'd been taught to fear and avoid were capable of extraordinary generosity and honor. That beneath leather and patches beat hearts as complex and compassionate as any others. As the morning progressed, a few neighbors cautiously approached, offering coffee and donuts to the workers. Bikers accepted with polite thanks, and the first tentative conversations began between worlds that had never expected to meet, much less understand each other. By Monday morning, the Cedar Creek Community Center hummed with activity. Not children's voices, not yet, but the sounds of drills, hammers, and saws as 24 bikers in leather vests worked alongside local contractors. The old roof, patched so many times it resembled a quilt, came off in sections. The ancient furnace that had wheezed through its final winter was hauled away as the new heating system arrived. Inside, walls received fresh paint in bright, cheerful colors. The stained carpet that had endured 15 years of spills and foot traffic was replaced with durable flooring. The kitchen, once barely functional, gleamed with new appliances donated by a biker who owned an appliance store 2 counties over. When the children returned the following week, they entered a building transformed. Their eyes widened at the rows of new computers, the art supplies, the sporting equipment. The bicycle presentation became a community event, each child receiving their own bike, fitted just for them, with a helmet and lock included. "My own bike?" 7-year-old Marcus whispered, running his hand over the shiny blue frame. "For keeps?" "For keeps," confirmed the tattooed biker, helping adjust his seat height. For children who had never owned anything new, these gifts represented more than material things. They represented a message. You matter. Your future matters. Someone believes in you. The summer program, nearly canceled due to lack of funding, not only continued but expanded. The center added music lessons when 3 bikers who played in a band donated instruments and time. A reading program flourished under Eleanor's guidance, supported now by proper materials and comfortable furniture. Cedar Creek's transformation extended far beyond the community center's walls. The town that had once called the sheriff in panic at the sight of leather vests now waved when motorcycle groups rumbled through. The coffee shop that had previously asked bikers to move along now reserved parking spaces for them. "I never thought I'd say this," Mayor Wilson admitted at a town meeting, "but those Hells Angels and their friends have done more for our children than the county budget could manage in 10 years. When a Bandidos member opened an auto repair shop on Main Street, he received welcome baskets from 3 local churches. When the Pagans sponsored a blood drive, Cedar Creek set a regional record for donations. Mrs. Peterson, who had once fainted at the sight of motorcycles approaching, now proudly displayed a photo of herself sitting on a Harley, flanked by laughing bikers, at her Sunday school class. "Judge not," she quoted, "lest ye be judged." For Eleanor, the transformation was deeply personal. Her quiet farmhouse, once a place of solitude and sometimes loneliness, became a regular stop for riding groups passing through the area. They never arrived unannounced or stayed too long, always respectful of her space and routine, but they checked on her, brought supplies before winter storms, and made sure her driveway stayed plowed and her roof secure. On her 83rd birthday, 20 Hells Angels from the original night escorted her to dinner in Millfield. The procession of motorcycles and one very surprised elderly woman causing quite a stir. Frank, preacher, made it a point to call her weekly, his gravelly voice checking in about her health, her needs, and her ongoing work at the community center. When her son from California finally visited, shocked by the changes in both the town and his mother's social circle, Eleanor simply shrugged. "Family comes in many forms," she told him. "Sometimes it finds you when you least expect it." The story of Eleanor Vance and her biker benefactors didn't stay contained in Cedar Creek. A local newspaper article was picked up by regional media, then national outlets. A 3-minute human interest segment on the evening news sparked hundreds of thousands of shares online. Other motorcycle clubs across the country, inspired by the story, sought out struggling community centers in their own areas. A movement began, informal and grassroots, of leather-clad men and women adopting causes in communities that had previously feared them. In Minneapolis, bikers raised funds for a women's shelter. In Phoenix, they rebuilt a playground destroyed by vandals. In Charleston, they created a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. What began as one woman opening her door during a blizzard had created a cascade of kindness that reached far beyond anything she could have imagined. The lessons of Eleanor's story resonate because they touch universal truths we all recognize. Look beyond appearances. Everyone deserves the dignity of being seen as a human being first, not as a stereotype or a label. The most unlikely people often become our greatest allies when we approach them with respect instead of fear. And perhaps most powerfully, kindness returns multiplied. Eleanor's simple act of hospitality, opening her door when it would have been easier to keep it closed, came back to her community 1,000-fold. The prayer she sent out into the world through that open door returned as an answered blessing. An open door is a prayer you send out into the world, her grandmother had taught her. Eleanor could never have predicted how powerfully that prayer would be answered. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. We all need reminders that courage, kindness, and seeing people for who they truly are can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. Subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary true American stories, tales of everyday heroes, unexpected friendships, and the moments that remind us what truly matters. Because in a world that sometimes seems determined to divide us, stories like Eleanor's show us what's possible when we have the courage to open our doors to one another. Remember, heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they ride Harleys, and sometimes they're 82-year-old teachers who understand that the most powerful act in the world is seeing another human being for who they really are.